Hello, Abnormal Investigations. Got another encounter for you. I think you're going to really enjoy this one. Um, let's just go ahead and get into it, and y'all can let me know. This was not something I myself witnessed, but instead one my grandmother told me about Mike, and I feel like it should be shared. My later aunt also corroborated this separately. For a little background, my grandparents' currently aunt's home is in backwoods of Virginia, extremely thick forest with hilly terrain in all directions. You have to get on a dirt path and follow it for about half a mile to get to the gravel-covered side road, and then follow it for about 30 minutes to reach a very small town just across North Carolina border. If you go a short ways north, you find yourself at the Blue Ridge Mountains and a parkway that led up to the Appalachian proper. The forest is mostly low-lying shrubs up to about 4 feet high with pine and a lot of black oak trees making up the canopy. There is a very clear stream about 30 yards from the house which has fish quite frequently. This, along with wild blackberries, tender leaf shrubs, and some apple trees, make it very lucrative for wildlife. The house itself is an old 2-story house built onto an incline of the hill that overlooks it. This was back in the 1970s. My aunt believes it was actually 1978, as she was finishing high school at the time. My father had graduated from college and was going on to the Air Force, so he had already moved out. My grandfather, although he was old enough to retire, he liked to remain busy, so he worked his old job as an electrician and power pole technician, just now in an advisory role because he was getting up there in years. He had just gotten the contract down in North Carolina, so he was away from the house for about a week and a half. This left only my 17-year-old aunt and my grandmother at the house. As I said, there usually was a lot of wildlife in the area. A typical morning for my grandmother was making breakfast and sitting out on her porch watching the deer and rabbits eat at the shrubs. Sometimes she would also see or hear a bobcat, fox, or even a coyote. On one occasion, a mountain lion and her cubs strolled right past the house. One animal she was familiar with in particular was a very large black bear, who could be recognized by folks around these parts from a white patch on his chest and a hole in his left ear. My grandmother nicknamed him Captain, because he had a habit of sitting on his haunches and reaching up with his paws to pick apples, a motion that looked like he was saluting. Captain was a very big black bear, but wasn't very aggressive unless tested. He seemed to have an agreement with my grandmother and grandfather that if they left him alone, he would leave them alone. He had just strolled by the house every now and then to save some blackberries, or to gather some to take on his way. The bushes or apples that had fallen down, which meant he came by the house's yard often, as he was too big to climb trees much more, and the fruit trees around the house were low enough that he could just reach up and pick whatever he wanted. My grandfather guesstimated he was somewhere between 500 to 600 pound range and roughly 6 feet tall, as my grandfather once measured some scratch marks he left on a tree. During the week, my grandmother noticed a fairly sharp decline in the animals nearby. It was the latter part of the summer and a wet season, so most of the plants were full bloom and the leaves were at their tenderest. Yet she couldn't see hide or hair of any rabbits or deer coming in graze. A coyote had her yapping every night for the past month seemed to vanish, and new neighbors, by neighbors I mean people who lived within 5 miles, who stopped by told her something had happened to their dog and their chicken coop had been smashed into. They assumed the mountain lion had lurked about and had done it, since it was the only other thing that they could feasibly take down a large farm dog, as they had seen Captain, the day after a completely different area, gorging himself on a dead deer. They checked around and couldn't find anything. The next night my grandmother was woken up by my aunt, who told her that she heard something bang against the outside of her wall. They checked around in the morning after and found it one of the deer butchered with a bloody smear on the wall. Judging from the way the gravel was disturbed, the deer had been walking by the house when something ambushed it, and in the struggle it got smacked against the wall of the house. My grandmother, having grown up in the woods, was familiar with the predator kills and methods. Mountain lions tend to jump on the back and rake their claws across the flanks to hold on as they bite the neck. Black bears usually break the neck or or break the back with their paws while biting the head. On rare occasions coyotes attack deer. They usually do it by biting down on the inside of the leg and twisting it to rip the muscle and the arteries. This kill clearly had the throat ripped out, but there weren't any claw marks to be found, and the bite looked narrower than what a cougar would do. Plus, she could gender there was only one predator from the way the ground had been disturbed, which didn't make any sense for coyotes as typically hunted in pairs, since just one alone isn't usually enough to bring down a full-grown deer. After disposing of the carcass, the next few nights were relatively uneventful, except for the fact that several times my aunt and grandmother would be woke up in the middle of the night by the sound of something panting outside. Now, in these woods, you can hear a pin drop if it's close enough at some points. They could swear the animal making the panting was directly outside the wall. Heavy breathing. One day, my grandmother was picking some berries when she noticed what she looked like dog tracks of a very large dog going through the mud flat bordering the nearby stream, thinking it might be the missing farm dog, who had maybe just run away. She followed the tracks until she heard something loudly growling at her across the stream. She looked up to see the partially obscured face of what looked like a large, bulky, brown-colored coyote or wolf standing in a thicket on the other side of the stream. She quickly began to back away, glancing back to check her footing on the slope that led down the stream. When she looked back, she saw the very distinctly canine face in much greater detail, because the animal had moved out from under cover. But instead of stepping out of the leaves like she thought it did at first, she soon noticed that the legs that she was looking at, the hind legs, were peering over the shrubs. Now, she had seen canines stand upright before. Dogs do it, foxes can do it, coyotes sometimes do it. It was the size that took her off guard. She had been to that exact same thicket of shrubs just the other day, and her head only just barely reached the top, and my grandmother was around 5'3". This thing had its head pitched over the shrubs with a little bit of extra visible, and usually when a predator is making no attempt to hide, it's usually because it's trying to intimidate someone. My grandmother managed to back away to the hill without turning around, and when she started to get out of sight, the creature stepped out. It stepped right out of the thicket onto its hind legs. It strolled forward in a very uncanny way. She had trouble describing, but she insisted it never went back down on all fours. Needless to say, she ran to the house and backpedaled sprint. That night they heard the panting again, along with the distraught howls and the scraping sounds. They found the garage door, back door frame, and kitchen window frame all had claw marks on them from something investigating them, but they did not look to be those of a bear. The canine creature was seen a few more times across the week by my grandmother and the neighbors, usually on or near the area of my family's property. My aunt finally saw it when she saw a pair of fuzzy ears outside her window. Now, she wasn't startled right off the bat from this, as Captain had come by her window a few times before and had gradually lost some fear of the big bear over the years. But in this case, his ears just barely reached the edge of the window sill, whereas in this case you could barely see them and the top of their owner's head. She quickly realized it wasn't a bear because of the pointed shape, brown coloring, and the fact it had fully intact ears. They also started to detect a very pungent smell on the side door porch, one time finding what looked like some urine or some other liquid stains on it, suggesting the animal had scented their door and had marked it as its claim. It all came to a head on a Wednesday night when they heard howling in the distance grow closer. My grandmother flipped on the porch light and glimpsed the canine animal quickly sprinting across the lawn on its hind legs again, her sighting confirming how big it was. For several hours of the night, they could hear it roaming around the property and pressing against doors like it was trying to find a way in. They glimpsed at several points of eyeshine, of yellow eyes peering in through the windows, as well as broad, long-fingered paws being pushed against the glass. This was the day and age before cell phones and 24-hour police service in some rural areas, so no one had a means of immediately calling the police. Instead, my grandmother had to wait arduously minutes on a landline with connecting difficulty, trying to call the police station 2 towns over. She was distracted by my aunt screaming, running in the bedroom to get one of the guns out. She had been sitting in the living room when she felt clicking against the glass and saw that wolf thing, pressing its face and bared teeth against the surface, with its claws fully outstretched. Both of them started to try to get to the rifles or shotguns out. It was becoming increasingly clear the creature was trying to get into the house, and they knew that they were in danger. They heard the panting through the wall before there was any sound of heavy footsteps and very loud thump. Now, it's not like in the movies when creatures roar or snarl. It's hiss consistently, no matter what they're doing. My aunt and grandmother hadn't the faintest idea what was going on outside and didn't investigate until the morning after, but they could tell something was antagonizing something, as occasional grunts, barks, and rumbles were audible through the blackness. They found no bodies, but there had clearly been a ferocious altercation. The ground was ripped up into multiple spots, the wall and the den in it, and there was some oxidized blood traces on the grass of the dirt. My grandmother also found a trail where something had charged through the shrubs and recovered several vague dog points as wider tracks moving in the same direction. The animals all seemed to come back by the end of the week, and the howl stopped. When my grandfather came back home, he and my aunt and some neighbors surveyed the area to make sure they couldn't find the wolf creature. Evidently, the neighbors had also heard the howls around their property at night and stopped recently too. They couldn't find it despite surveying the whole property, though. They did find what looked like a track away leading to the property running off into the mountains. Several days later, my grandmother saw Captain again marking his territory by rubbing up against a tree in their yard and scratching the bark. He had several cuts across his muzzle. He was missing patches of fur and some healed bite wounds on his arm. The hole in his ear had been torn open to the point he was missing half of his ear flap. But other than that, he had a slight limp that went away over time. We all believe that night that bear might have saved us. The bear, I believe, fought the creature away from our house. My grandmother also believed that it fought the creature away from our house. Did that old bear save our life, Mike? What do you think? I believe it's very possible that the bear did. I don't know if he would have done it on purpose or if he just would have been in the area when this happened and they just happened to have an altercation over the food and territorial for the food, because the bear, I'm sure, wanted the shrubs and fruit and all. I'm going to say the dog man probably wanted you guys. I know all about trying to call police to get them out on these kind of things. Sometimes we'd call them and they never even would show up when we were watching things in my granny's front yard. Oftentimes they would promise to be on their way after several phone calls and we would never even see hide or hair of them. So I know what it's like to be able to try to get the police over and to try to get things, but sometimes in rural towns they don't have the money to have police after midnight, so what they do is they have a police officer on duty till like midnight and then they have one on call. So when you live in these kind of areas, it's pretty much up to yourself to take care of yourself, and that's when you start learning how to set traps, lock your doors, go in at certain times, take certain precautions and things like that. Us country folk have a way of surviving, like the old song, a country boy can survive. But you have to learn those things when you have no help or when the police laugh at you when you tell them what you're seeing. So the best course of action sometimes is just to tell them that you see somebody or you have a prowler. You're more likely to get them to come out because, trust me, they're not going to believe you if you tell them what you're seeing. Or even if they do believe you, they're not going to come out because they've already been told not to investigate those things. So that's kind of my opinion. But until next time, guys, keep your head on a swivel, and we'll see you on the next one.